Hey everybody, Pastor Hans here. Thank you so much for being with us today. Whether you are home on your couch or you're sitting on your device, or maybe you're with one of our partners like our friends at West Mo. We are in week 3 of a worship series we are calling Make Room. And to get into things today, I want to tell you a story that a mentor of mine shared with me not all that long ago. She told me the story of her friend Sarah. Sarah had been pregnant and she gave birth to a beautiful daughter, Perry, and she was in the hospital the day of the birth. Just after the birth, but a couple hours after her daughter was born, the nurse came into the room and she had a form that needed to be filled out. It was the form that she would end up sending in that would allow her to receive an official birth certificate for her daughter. And so the nurse asked some standard questions. Would you give me the child's father's name? And Sarah, she would say the name of her husband. She would say both her first name and his last name, nice and slow. She would spell it to make sure it was correct on the birth certificate. And then the nurse said, would you share with me the mother's name? Would you share with me your name? And Sarah would share her name. Again, she would say it nice and slow. This is my name. And she would spell it out for her a couple of times. And one thing about Sarah chose not to take her husband's name. And so the name was different than her husband's name. And that's when, as the nurse heard that she had not taken her husband's name, the nurse sort of snorted. She made this sort of scoffing sound. You know, you've heard it before. And then, get this, on the day of her child's birth, this nurse had the gall to make a disparaging comment to Sarah about women who choose not to take their husband's last name. Well, Sarah, she didn't think all that much about it. Heck, her daughter was born and she kind of blew it off. She didn't think much of it until a few weeks later when the birth certificate came in the mail. She opened the birth certificate and of course it read her daughter's name, Perry, and then it read the father's name. And then when it got to her name, the mother's name, here's what the birth certificate read. Mother's name, Sarah Unknown, You see, there's absolutely no way that nurse didn't get it right. She had said it a number of times. She had spelled it out, her last name. It was right on that little bracelet you wear at the hospital. It was correct on all the bills she had received from the hospital. But for this nurse, you see, Sarah's choice of not taking her husband's last name, it was just too different. And so this nurse, what did she do? She gave Sarah a name. I was thinking about that story, and unfortunately, isn't that what we do? I mean, in our lives, when we encounter people who are different from us, people who maybe have a different sort of upbringing, people who have different views than us, whether it's on politics or child raising, we do that. We do kind of the same thing. We look at those people and we say they're not like us, and then what do? We give them a name. We give them a label. For example, my parents, they decided to torture me when I was in middle school. We moved from a big city to a small town in rural North Dakota when I was in 7th grade. Talk about torture. I think I'm going to start a support group for all of us that moved in middle school. And when I got to school, it was absolutely clear that I was different from all the other kids. I didn't dress the way kids from rural North Dakota dressed. I didn't talk the way kids from rural North Dakota talked. I didn't do the sorts of things that kids from rural North Dakota did. I was different. And so they gave me a name. They gave me a label. I was the new kid. And if you've ever moved into a small town, you know that the new kid label, it lasts for a really long time. Or how about this? This Christmas, you'll gather together with family. And sometimes I think it's sort of ironic how we can all be part of the same family, but sometimes feel different. For example, you might have different parenting views. You might have a member of your family that votes differently than you do. Maybe you have a family member who just sort of sees the world differently. And we have a label for that relative, don't we? It's that relative. If you don't know who that relative is in your family, you might want to look in the mirror. We do this with politics too, right? It's those crazy liberals, those nutty conservatives. At Christmas, maybe you'll have members of your family who travel to town from urban places. What do we call those family members? We call them city slickers. And what do they call those of us who are from rural places? They call us those hicks from the sticks. We do this. Don't we love our labels? And here's how we usually come to those labels. We look at people and we go, they're different than us. They don't do things the right way. They didn't come from the right place. They don't see things in the way I do. Their politics are all wrong. Their parenting, it's all wrong. And what it causes us to do is to say it's us and them. It's us and them. They have their view. I have my view. We want to sort of separate ourselves from them. And what we're really doing is we're saying they and their views, well, they are less than us. I learned some lessons when I was a kid in the family I grew up in that I needed to unlearn about the sorts of people that were less than us. You see, in the family I grew up in, I learned a lesson that Native American people, they're lazier than us. I learned that African American people are angrier than us. I learned that Jewish people were less trustworthy than us. Those were lessons I've all had to unlearn. But we do this, don't we? We say it's us and them, and what we're really saying is, well, they are less than us. And so that causes us to need to give them what? A label so that we can separate ourselves from them. Well, folks, today, as I said, we are in week 3 of a series which we are calling Make Room. We're talking about how this God of ours, on that first Christmas, chose a whole host of characters. And each of those characters he chose particularly. He chose each of them to show us the sort of people that this Jesus was going to make room for. And so the first week of this series, Angie gave a great message about how God chose John the Baptist to announce the coming of this child. But John the Baptist, he had all kinds of doubts about who Jesus was. The story reminds us that this God of ours makes room for those of us that have doubts now and then. And last week, I shared a message about Mary and Joseph and the mess of a life they had. And we talked about how this God of ours makes room for those of us who have a whole lot of messes in our life. But today, here's what I want to do. I want to take a look at those characters who lived out in the field, the shepherds. And I want to wonder a little bit about how just maybe those shepherds teach us something about the people who are different from us, those people we like to label. I want to wonder about this question. The question goes like this: what do I do about people who are different from me? Now, those shepherds who lived out in the field, you got to know something about shepherds. Shepherding was probably the most degrading occupation in that ancient world. And people had all kinds of labels for shepherds. For example, here's what you need to know about shepherds. Shepherds were seen as social outcasts. I mean, simply because of the fact that they lived out in the field, they were dirty. I mean, they bathed in whatever pond or river they'd find. They were smelly. They were rancid. When they'd walk through the city streets, people would clear away from them. You might say they were just simply a filthy mess. They spend day and night, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week out in the wilderness. They didn't spend much time with people in the city, many people at all. And so they were sort of loners, if you will. And because they were loners, because they were sort of mysterious, people looked at them as with an eye of suspicion, with an eye of, hey, they're not so trustworthy. In fact, they were often seen, they had the reputation of being thieves. If a shepherd walked into your store, you would keep an eye on them because you weren't sure. They were sort of shady characters. You see, people in that ancient world, they had all kinds of labels for shepherds. They were social outcasts, but they were also religious outcasts. They were religious outcasts because in that day and age, what people believed is that if you were dirty on the outside, you were also dirty on the inside. A cleanliness on the outside meant a spiritual cleanliness on the inside. And these shepherds were just plain dirty. And so they were unclean. And because they were unclean, they were unwelcome in the synagogue. They were unwelcome in places of worship. You would never have ever seen a shepherd in the temple. You see, this is who the shepherds were. And it's sort of ironic that these are the sorts of people that God chose to first announce the news of his son coming into this world. And then he chose them to announce to the rest of the world that this is my son. I mean, God should have chosen kings and queens, princes and princesses, if you think about it. God should have chosen Caesar Augustus, the Holy Roman Emperor, or Herod, or kings or governors. God could have and should have chosen the religious elite, the religious muckety-mucks of his day. People like the scribes, the Pharisees, the chief priests. But God didn't. God said, oh no, I'm going to use these shepherds. I'm going to tell them first, and I'm going to use them to announce my son breaking into this world. And here's the thing you need to know. No one was more surprised by this than the shepherds. The story goes like this. It says, and there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby. They were just keeping watch, right? They were doing what they do every day, keeping watch over their flocks at night. It goes on to say, an angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were, say it with me, they were terrified. But it goes on and it says, but the angel said to them, do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Those shepherds were terrified. Why were they terrified? They were terrified because of this. Shepherds never got good news. They didn't. I mean, they would get all kinds of bad news. I mean, the law enforcement of that day, when they would find those shepherds out in the fields and accuse them of this or that crime, they got plenty of bad news. When they walked through town, they got all kinds of bad news in the form of judging stares. They got all kinds of bad news in the form of the sort of lack of welcome they had by the religious people of that day. They got all kinds of bad news when bandits would steal their sheep, or they'd find the carcass of one of their animals after a wild animal had attacked their sheep. You see, they got all kinds of bad news, but good news? No way. They never got good news. And so when the skies opened up above them, I'm sure they thought God was going to start launching lightning bolts or unleash God's wrath on them. You see, they never got good news. But they heard of this child. And so it says, they hurried off and they found Mary and Joseph and the baby who was lying in a manger. When they had seen him, they spread the word concerning what had been told them about this child. And all who heard it, they were amazed. Everyone was shocked. Everyone was stunned because shepherds weren't the sort of people that were privy to this kind of information. In fact, I imagine many of them were appalled because, again, they had labels for shepherds. Shepherds, they were dirty, they were rancid, they were a filthy mess, they were untrustworthy, they were thieves. You see, those ancient people, they led with their labels. They led with labels. And today I want to wonder, don't we do the same thing? As a pastor, I probably shouldn't admit this, but I'm human, and every once in a while we have one or two people from our church that sort of get under my skin. Can I admit that? They get under my skin. And there was this one woman, we're going to use the name Susan, a few years ago. Susan, every time I saw her, she had to tell me everything that was not right with our church. And so if I'm honest, when I saw her coming, I would hide. I've hid in the bathroom from her. I hid in my office from her. But every time I did encounter her, I tried to be nice to her, to compliment her on her smile and ask about her kids or grandkids, ask about her husband, ask about her bunions, you know, the regular conversation. But I always tried to cut the conversation short. And here's why. Because after a couple of minutes, she would start launching grenades. Hans, the music is too loud. Hans, someone forgot to shovel the walk out front the church. Hans, the lawn looks terrible. Hans, the decorations in the sanctuary are downright ugly. Hans, what we're doing with our kids is all wrong. Hans, your messages are too long. Hans, people are going to start leaving our church. And when she said that, I always wanted to say, can I pick who the first one will be? And you better believe I had a label in the back of my head for this woman. And it'll be never, ever be spoken out loud. You see, we do the same thing that those ancient people did with the shepherds, right? We lead with our labels. We say it's us and it's them, which really means they are less than us, right? And then we give them a label so we can distance ourselves from them. And here's what I've noticed that we've done in the last few years. We don't just kind of distance ourselves from other people, do we? We somehow believe that they who are different than we are, that there's something wrong with them. We've become sort of outraged by their difference. And so what do we do when someone is different than us? We don't just say it's us and them. We don't just give them a label. We take to social media and we rant. We write some bombastic rant about who they are and what they've supposedly done, right? We take and we write letters to the editor. We shoot off emails. We teach our kids that acceptance, nah. You've got to get your way or the highway, right? We gossip about people. Let me ask you a question. The question goes like this. Name a time when you learned something from someone. Why were you able to learn it? Think about that. I'm guessing you'd answer that question maybe by saying, hey, there was once a coach and he saw how I was standing at the plate and he adjusted it. Oh man, it increased my batting average like nothing else. Or he saw how I was throwing my curveball and he adjusted my fingers just so. And I threw the best curveball I could imagine. Or maybe that coach, because he was someone you trusted, he sat you down and he gave you some advice. And it made all the difference in the world. Or maybe you had a mentor. It was a friend of your parents, or it was a godparent who sat down and listened to you. And then they gave you some advice that changed the direction of your life because you trusted them. I mean, that question, name a time when you learned something in your life and why you learned it. I'm guessing there isn't a one of us that would answer that question in a way like this. I learned it because someone posted a rant on Facebook, sent me email after email telling me that I was the stupidest person alive, wrote an inflammatory letter to the editor about me, screamed at me, used profanity, or punched me, right? But don't we think that's the way? That's the way we're supposed to interact with people who are different from us. You see, when we do that, I think we have a God who looks down at us and says, yeah, good luck with that. But this is what we do. We often lead with labels. But on that first Christmas, God chose to do something different. He chose shepherds. And when he chose those shepherds, God chose to lead with love. And here's why I think God does this. Because God knows that it's really easy for us to love people that we like. It's usually pretty darn easy for you to love that friend who's always there for you. It's pretty easy for you to love that grandparent who took you fishing. It's easy to love your spouse most of the time. I mean, loving people we like is sort of like putting on those comfy pants. You know what I'm talking about, the ones you put on right after Thanksgiving dinner. But loving people who are different from us, it can sometimes feel like putting on baby jeans that you got from the Gap, trying to squeeze your body into. It's hard, right? And that's why on that first Christmas, this God of ours chose shepherds. He said, these are going to be the people I'm going to tell first so that I can send a message to the world. And those shepherds, they would make their way to that stable and they would meet this Jesus, and this Jesus would grow up. And when he grew up, he would give us just one command. He'd say, there's one thing I ask of you. He said this. He said, a new commandment I give you. Say it with me. Love one another. He didn't say this is an option, like toppings on a pizza or intramural sports in college. He says, this is the one command I'm going to give you. Why do shepherds, of all people, show up in the story of the first Christmas? Because I think we have a God who wants to invite us to do something that is so simple, and yet it's often so hard for us. And that God invites us to lead with love. He says, if you're a follower of mine, this is how people will know it. You'll be the sort of people in your community where everyone looks at you and says, those people are different. They lead with love. The shepherds, everybody had a label for them. But God says, watch me. Watch what I'm going to do with these shepherds. Watch me lead with love.
Brightly shining, it is the night of our dear Savior's birth. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till He appeared and the soul felt its birth.
At this time, I invite you to join me as together we pray the prayer that our Lord taught us. Together we pray, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Folks, thanks so much for spending this time with us today. If you are new to our church family, to Calvary, we'd love for you to do something. We'd love for you to head out to our website, calvaryalec.org. And there's a little button that says sign up for emails. It's an easy next step for you. We'd love for you to get informed and connect with us. If you hit that button, you fill out the form, we'll get you on our email list. And every week we send out a little note that just shares some of the ways that you can get involved with us here at Calvary. Hey, you know this. I don't need to tell you. Christmas is coming. And we've got a big Christmas celebration planned for you and your family here at Calvary. If you're in the Alexandria area, we invite you to join us for any of our Christmas services. You can see the times and the dates on the screen. We've spread them out over 3 different days to hopefully accommodate for your family celebrations. The second thing I want to ask you is this: who do you know who needs an invitation this Christmas? We all have people in our lives who maybe feel far from God, far from the church. They've been turned off by bad religion and people's disparaging remarks who claim to be Christian people. Folks, I think you know this. They need a fresh start, a new perspective, a perspective that maybe we can provide them with here at Calvary. Would you invite them? You can use tools on social media. Here at the church, we've got postcards. We'd love for you to invite them to join us, either in person or online. Folks, thanks for being a part of our church family. If nothing else, just for today. We're grateful for the difference you make through your church giving. And so today we're going to close with a time of offering. Thank you for your generosity. It's making a huge difference in our community and beyond. You can make your offerings in one of the ways on the screen. The first way is to simply go to our website, calvaryalec.org, and there you can make your gift. You can make a one-time gift or a reoccurring gift, or you can use that app on your phone, Venmo, to make a gift. You can see our handle on the screen. Another way to make your gift is simply to write out a check and drop it in the mail to the address here on the screen. Or if you're not sure quite how to make your gift, or this Christmas season, you'd like to make a special gift, just give us a call in the church office. We'd love to connect with you. Folks, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week.